The quarterback room in Berea has officially become the most watched storyline in the entire NFL preseason, and Day 11 of Cleveland's training camp just added another layer to it that nobody fully saw coming a week ago. Shedeur Sanders was supposed to hand the reps back to Deshaun Watson today. That was the plan, at least according to what Todd Monken told reporters just days earlier when he laid out a fairly straightforward rotation. Watson would get his turn with the ones, Sanders would rotate down to work with the twos, and the competition would proceed in some kind of orderly, predictable fashion that everyone could track on a calendar. Instead, Sanders walked out for team drills and took every single first-team rep again. Every one. And when reporters pressed Monken about the discrepancy, his answer wasn't defensive, it was almost matter-of-fact, like he genuinely wanted people to stop overthinking the whole thing. He said the idea that reps are being hoarded or manipulated in some quiet, coordinated way doesn't really hold up, because as long as both quarterbacks are still splitting time with the ones on different days across the week, it remains a real, functioning competition. He even joked that his own players would know exactly how those reps were being distributed if there was some grand scheme going on behind the scenes, which was his way of saying the coaching staff isn't playing games here. They're managing a genuine battle in real time, adjusting on the fly the same way any staff does across a long, physically grinding training camp. Here's what makes this particular update even more interesting, though. Monken all but confirmed that both quarterbacks are going to start an actual preseason game at some point this month. Not just play in one, start one. That's a significant reveal, because it tells you Cleveland isn't ready to hand this job to anybody yet, no matter how loud the outside noise around Sanders has gotten over the last several weeks. He talked about needing to see both guys operate behind the starting offensive line in live game action, particularly once joint practices against Buffalo get underway, before any real decision gets made at the position. That detail is worth sitting with for a second, because it changes the entire shape of this competition going forward. Once those joint sessions start, Cleveland can't just feed one quarterback all the premium reps anymore the way they've been able to during isolated practice periods. They're going to have to rotate both guys through against a completely different opponent's defensive scheme, different looks, different pressure packages, which means the sample size on this whole evaluation is about to expand dramatically in a very short window. If you're a fan hoping for clarity before the Bears matchup specifically, you're not getting it, and honestly, you probably shouldn't expect it. Cleveland is intentionally keeping this thing open, stretching the evaluation window further into August than most outside observers expected. And that kind of patience says a lot about how seriously the front office and coaching staff are treating this particular decision. Now, was Sanders caught off guard by getting the ones again after being told the plan was shifting away from him? According to people close to him, yes, a little. But how he handled that moment says just as much about him as anything he did with the football today, maybe more. Monken specifically praised how Sanders responded to the shift, both in the immediate moment it happened on the practice field, and again today when the plan changed a second time without much warning attached to it. And when a rookie quarterback in the middle of a legitimate, nationally scrutinized quarterback controversy takes those curveballs and just keeps performing at a high level instead of letting it affect his demeanor, that's the kind of maturity coaching staffs actually pay close attention to when they're building out a depth chart under pressure. Talent gets you into the conversation. Composure under that level of scrutiny, with cameras and reporters tracking every single rep, is what keeps you in it long term, and it's the trait that tends to separate guys who eventually fold under a spotlight from guys who use that same spotlight as fuel to elevate their play. Because make no mistake, Sanders didn't just survive today's practice, he dominated it from start to finish. 3 touchdown passes, 3. Against the starting defense, not scout team looks, not garbage time reps tacked onto the end of a low-intensity period. The kind of production that makes it very hard to bury the story under generic coach speak about competition and rotation, no matter how badly the organization might genuinely want to keep things politically balanced in front of a media contingent that's hungry for a headline either way. Let's talk about the throw that's going to be all over Brown's highlight reels tonight, because it might be the single best rep of camp so far from either quarterback. Sanders rolled to his right, working across his body under real pressure bearing down on him, and delivered a ball to Dylan Sampson that had exactly one possible outcome. Either Sampson comes down with it, or it sails harmlessly out of bounds. There was no version of that throw where a defender comes away with an interception, no matter how well the coverage was playing it. That's not luck. That's pure quarterback instinct, the kind of feel for spacing and risk you can't fully coach into somebody no matter how much film they watch. It's also exactly why Sanders has kept his turnover numbers manageable throughout his young career at every level he's played at. He protects the football by refusing to give defenders a realistic chance at it, even when the throwing window looks tight and the pocket is starting to collapse around him under duress. Then there's the play in the red zone that genuinely impressed me the most on film, maybe more than any single rep from the entire day. Sanders looked hard to his left, selling the defense on a throw toward Denzel Boston, holding that eye discipline just long enough to influence the safety's positioning, and then came back across the field to hit Harold Fannin Jr. for a touchdown on the opposite side. That's advanced quarterback vision and manipulation. That's not something rookies typically show up doing consistently in year one, deceiving a defender with your eyes before delivering an accurate throw to a completely different read on the far side of the field. If you slow that rep down frame by frame like I did, you can actually watch the safety bite hard on the initial look before Fannin comes wide open in the back corner of the end zone with room to spare. That's exactly the kind of pre-snap and post-snap processing NFL coordinators specifically build practice scripts around testing for, and Sanders passed with a touchdown attached to it, which is about as good an outcome as that rep could have possibly produced. He didn't stop there either. Another touchdown to Denzel Boston in the back corner of the end zone on a beautifully placed ball. A well-timed comeback throw to Jerry Jeudy that showed off real anticipation and rhythm. A play-action connection with Isaiah Bond on an out route that required precise timing and ball placement to fit into a tight window, and repeated work at the line of scrimmage getting through his cadence, checking protections, and firing the snap-off quickly without wasted motion. That last part matters more than casual fans watching the highlights probably realize. Monken has been vocal publicly about wanting to see Sanders speed up his entire pre-snap operation, get to the line faster, make his adjustments without hesitation, and get the football out on time against the clock. Today, that's exactly what showed up on tape, rep after rep after rep. When a coach names a very specific area for improvement publicly, and then a player visibly attacks that exact weakness days later in live practice conditions, that's the real story underneath the box score. That's genuine development happening in real time, not just a good stat line that fans can point to on social media. So by the raw numbers, Sanders finished 16 of 23 passing with 3 touchdowns against Cleveland's first-team defense. Watson, working opposite him with the twos, went 15 of 22 with 2 touchdowns of his own, which is a genuinely solid, professional outing that shouldn't get lost underneath the Sanders headlines dominating the conversation tonight. Dylan Gabriel picked up limited work at 5 of 8 on the day, and Bailey Green didn't see the field in team drills at all. On paper, Sanders had the better day, full stop, no real argument there. Better completion percentage, more touchdowns, and he did all of it against the starting caliber defense instead of the backups working the twos. That context matters more than people give it credit for in these conversations. Beating up on a twos defense and beating a legitimate ones defense that includes Myles Garrett rushing off the edge are simply not the same conversation, and Sanders had the tougher assignment on paper today and still produced the bigger, cleaner box score by a comfortable margin. But before anyone starts printing QB1 jerseys and calling this thing decided, I want to pump the brakes a little, because there's a part of this story that actually concerns me. Cleveland's offense, both units, completely fell apart during the 2-minute drill period. Sanders led his group down the field, only to watch the whole thing unravel through 3 straight pre-snap penalties, capped off by a Spencer Fano false start that got the entire offensive group pulled off the field early by the coaching staff. That's not on Sanders individually in any real way. He can't control a lineman jumping early, or an operation collapsing around him in crunch time, no matter how clean his own footwork and decision-making look in that same sequence. But it's still worth flagging clearly, because 2-minute situations are exactly the kind of high-leverage, no-margin-for-error snapshots that evaluators tend to lean on heavily when they're separating quarterbacks in a competition this tight and this close to real regular season football. And it wasn't isolated to Sanders' group either, which is an important detail. Watson's 2-minute drill ended just as poorly, a sack followed by 2 more procedural penalties tacked on for good measure. Neither offense managed to pick up a single first down during that entire stretch of practice. Reporters on site were blunt about it afterward, calling it a sloppy finish to an otherwise strong day of work, and honestly, that's fair, accurate criticism. When your 2 starting quarterback options both can't move the football cleanly in simulated late-game situations on the exact same afternoon, that's not just a Sanders problem or a Watson problem in isolation. That's a broader team execution issue heading into a preseason opener against a Bears defense that isn't going to be forgiving about free procedural penalties and busted operations at the line of scrimmage. There's also the issue of drops today, and I think it deserves more attention than it's currently getting in the broader conversation. Sanders threw a well-placed ball to Gage Larson that fell incomplete, and at first glance it looked like it might get chalked up as an overthrow by anyone watching the play quickly, without a second look. Having played receiver myself earlier in my life, I went back and studied the angle again closely, and that drop is on the catch, not the placement of the throw. Denzel Boston also dropped a fade route in the end zone that he'd normally reel in without much trouble at all. These aren't guys who typically struggle with their hands on a regular basis, which tells you something meaningful about the overall focus and execution level across the roster right now, this deep into camp, this close to actually playing another team. I understand drops happen, they're simply part of the sport at every level of football. But when you're a receiver fighting for one of the final roster spots on a 53-man roster in a receiver room that's this deep and this competitive, there's genuinely no room left to forgive yourself on a catchable football. Every single rep right now functions as an audition, whether it feels that way in the moment or not, and the players who separate themselves this month are consistently the ones who finish plays, regardless of circumstance, fatigue, or how many reps they've already logged that day. Here's the bigger picture as Cleveland heads into that Bears preseason opener. This organization has built itself a legitimate, functioning quarterback competition, and Monken seems genuinely committed to letting it play out on the actual field instead of deciding it quietly behind closed doors in a meeting room somewhere. That's genuinely rare in today's NFL, where front offices often crown a starter before camp even opens, just to avoid exactly this kind of prolonged media circus and roster-wide uncertainty rippling through a locker room. Instead, Cleveland is embracing the discomfort of not knowing the answer yet, and so far, that patience is producing tangible results on the field. Sanders is answering every single challenge thrown at him. Whether that challenge comes from a shifting rep schedule with little notice, a stacked first-team defense trying to get after him, or a national spotlight that most rookies never have to deal with this early in their careers, Watson is quietly performing well enough in his own right that nobody can write him off either, even with a smaller sample of reps against lesser competition and a contract situation that adds its own separate layer of pressure onto every single throw he makes on that practice field. And Gabriel, buried a bit in the shuffle right now, behind 2 more prominent names getting most of the attention, is still out there doing his job efficiently with the limited opportunities available to him, which could end up mattering more than people currently think if this competition ever gets thrown wider open than expected. What I keep coming back to, more than any single stat from today, is this: Shedeur Sanders has spent this entire offseason under a microscope that most rookies never have to deal with in their first NFL training camp, from the draft slide that dominated national coverage for days on end to every single camp update getting dissected in real time by beat writers, national analysts, and fans across the entire league. Today, in the middle of a genuinely uncomfortable situation where the coaching staff shifted plans on him without much warning attached, he didn't complain publicly, he didn't sulk through practice, and he didn't let any of that frustration bleed into his footwork or his decision-making on the field. He went out and threw 3 touchdowns against a first-team defense, while simultaneously continuing to clean up the exact mechanical detail his own head coach had specifically flagged as a priority just days earlier. That's the kind of response you want to see from a guy trying to prove he genuinely belongs at the top of an NFL depth chart, and it's the kind of response that tends to earn real trust from a locker room faster than any single highlight throw could on its own. The penalties and the drops are real, legitimate issues that need fixing as a unit before Cleveland travels to face Chicago, and I'm not going to pretend those problems don't matter just because the quarterback play looked sharp on both sides of the football today. Cleveland has less than 2 weeks now before that opener, and sloppy operation in 2-minute situations is exactly the kind of thing that gets magnified once real opponents and real coaching film study enter the picture in a game that actually counts, even if only marginally. But if you're grading Sanders individually on day 11 of this camp, this was about as strong a bounce-back performance as you could realistically ask for given everything swirling around him off the field this week, and it's going to make Cleveland's eventual decision at the quarterback position even harder to make than it already was, heading into this final stretch before the season begins.